Grace and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening as we continue our midweek devotional series on Change the World, a book by Robert E. Quinn. In case you are visiting us for the first time or watching this for the first time, my name is Vicar Dave. I serve alongside with Pastor Steve Smithberger at the West Toledo Parish, which is the collaborative efforts between All Saints Lutheran Church and Epiphany Lutheran Church in Toledo, Ohio. So just a huge thank you for joining with me this evening as we just take a few moments to set aside of our day to worship and to reflect and to consider just how God is at work in our lives and in the communities around us. So as Pastor Steve laid out for us last week, we are going through Change the World by Robert Quinn, a phenomenal book that is kind of designed to help motivate and inspire and get us to think just kind of outside of our normal boxes and routines and schemas, if you will, to throw a psychological term out there at you. So what we are doing today is we are continuing along with the second chapter, but what Mr. Quinn does is he sets up his book with what are called seeds of thought, or thought seeds, however you wish to put that out. So the first seed thought of his book is called Envisioning the Productive Community. And before we jump into that, what I want to do is throw a question out at you. I want you to dwell with this, to think about it while we go through our devotion today, but also to take it with you for the rest of this week. And just to kind of ponder it, if you will. So our dwelling question for today is, if you were given the choice between being effective or being in control, which would you choose and why? Now, for those of you that may be journaling, please go ahead and journal this. Think about it. Wrestle with it, because it's a pretty deep question. And how you choose to answer this question can say a lot about how you understand, envision, and interact with communities. Because let's be honest, we all have some understanding, some preconceived notions about how the world around us works, right? And part of the world around us is communities. So we as individuals understand how communities function, right? We understand that in each community there are roles, there are certain things that need to be done. In some cases we have communities within communities. We're part of large communities, small communities, blood-related communities, friendship communities. I mean, you name it. There's a community for it. It's kind of like an app almost, right? So we have these ideas about how communities are supposed to function and operate and how we are supposed to integrate with that. But what Robert Quinn is talking about in this book, specifically with the envisioning of the productive community, is he's challenging the idea of community and how we see it and structure it. And he does it by using, a variety of different methods focused around three quotes, which, as we remember from last week, we'll get a quote from Jesus, a quote from Gandhi, and a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. So let's go ahead and jump right into those. So our first quote today comes from Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, the 20th chapter. So Jesus called the followers together. He said, "You know that the rulers of the non-Jewish people love to show their power over the people. And their important leaders love to use all their authority over the people. But it should not be that way with you. Whoever wants to be your leader must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must serve the rest of you like a slave." In our quote from Gandhi, In the Orthodox army, there is a clear distinction between officer and private. In a non-violent army, the general is just the chief servant, first among equals. And from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., nonviolent resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. So these three quotes do some pretty spectacular things if we look at it from the context of community and how community should work, right? We understand that in community there are going to be differences. Even if everybody in the community shares similarities with each other, there are still going to be differences. And what's highlighted in this seed thought is the notion of hierarchies, right? And even if we look at the quotes from all three, there is that sense of hierarchy, that sense of position within the community, right? So the idea of a productive community isn't an idea that challenges the hierarchy within the community, but redefines the hierarchy in its application on how it treats other people. If we look at what Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is putting that the ruler, the highest in the hierarchy, the highest member of the community, should be servant, should be serving the lowest member of the community. Right? If we look at what Gandhi says, that the generals, although they lead the troops, the generals should be first among equals, the first servant of the privates, the lowest of the low in the army. And then when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is quoted, we're looking at the idea of creating a beloved community of friends, not one where we're using our power and authority to convince and convert and subjugate, but one where we are equalizing the playing field, reminding everyone that we are truly equal. So what we have here is we have a discussion on the productive community, a community that transcends how the world says a community should behave. And the way Dr. Quinn writes in this book is he characterizes the community by this. A productive community is a community that is characterized by clarity of purpose, high standards of performance, and highly trusting and supportive relationships. Right? And this kind of community, this productive community, is a community that allows for learning and change. And part of change is growth. Right? So this brings us back to that question that we're dwelling with. If you were given the choice between being effective or in control, which would you choose? If you're brought into a community and you have the choice to be a productive member of this community or a member who is in control, what would you choose to do? A lot of us, I think, are geared towards just that, control, right? I know me personally, I'm all about being in control. When I was going through my undergrad, we talked about what's called the loci of control. And through some testing, I learned that mine is a very internal loci of control, which means that I personally believe that my destiny is forged by my own hands, right? That even if the world around me is behaving foolishly and garbage and trying to get in my way, I can overcome it because I'm the one that is in control. I don't let others or situations dictate me and my future. That's my job, right? But that kind of a mantra, that kind of an opinion is very self-serving, isn't it? And if we take that and look at our three quotes, it kind of stands in opposition to this idea that the highest of the high need to serve the lowest of the low. Now, some of these characteristics that we just listed by Dr. Quinn, you may say, well, Dave, that doesn't sound very spiritual or very Christian. And yes, I can see that argument there too. It does have a very worldly feel to it. As Pastor Steve pointed out, it's a kind of a corporate thing. It's a structural thing. But the heart of what's going on in this first seed of thought here, this productive community, can take us to that heart of Christian idealism. Because this is not the first time I have heard these things, right? It's one book that we are constantly coming back to right now in seminary is called Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. This is an excellent additional resource about the Christian community. So if you haven't read this, I highly encourage you to pick it up. It's pretty cheap. It's a very easy, short read. But what it does is that it takes these principles that we're discussing here in this devotion and takes the complete spiritual and Christian approach to it. But they work in tandem. What Bonhoeffer says here about a Christian community parallels what Quinn is talking about from the corporate community, right? And as Pastor Steve said, sometimes these things can be applied in both directions. And even though we're not looking to maximize our productivity, from like a point of sales or market value or anything like that, we are trying to maximize how effective we are as a community of believers in sharing and living into the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing for us as a productive community is making sure that we are preaching the gospel, that we are taking the gospel message and the redemptive saving grace of Jesus Christ into a world that needs it. It's very easy for us to insulate, to become an internal loci of control and ensure our own survivability within our four walls and roof and floor. But that's not being truly productive or effective when it comes to the gospel message. It's designed, the gospel, to be sent out, to be taken to all the corners of the world, to take it out of our community into other communities, to expand our communities, to bring other people in so they understand how much they are loved and appreciated, not only by God, but by us. Truly productive communities, whether it's in the corporate world, the secular world, or in our own religious and spiritual world, they are what Quinn calls inner-directed and other-focused. Right now, I'm in a Lutheran ethics class at Wartburg, and this right here is the heart of Lutheran ethics, to be focused not on our own well-being, but to be focused for the well-being of our neighbor. To be neighbor-focused, to be other-focused. That's what being Christian is all about. That's what following Christ means, right? Jesus says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. We are called to serve. And it doesn't matter where we are in a hierarchical, in the hierarchy. Sometimes I can't say words. It doesn't matter where we are in that structure. We are still called to serve everyone equally, to love equally, to support equally. We need to be inner-directed and other-focused. Now, some of these terms may be a little confusing. I know I was a little, thrown off by the inner-directed portion of this statement. But as we go through the chapter and we listen to the breakdown and the explanations, what Dr. Quinn is really talking about inner-directed is we understand our own limitations and our own growing edges, where we can grow and how we can change, right? As Pastor Steve pointed out last week, the whole purpose of this is to expand the idea on and the truth and dwell with how we ourselves can become transformational entities in the lives of others and in the world around us. And that gets to the heart of the gospel, right? If we let Jesus Christ into our lives, into our communities, then we will be transformed. The gospel message is a transformative message, right? Unless a grain of wheat dies, new life can't happen. Unless the old ways of our being and our treating others dies and we become a new creation, then we can't truly be productive, right? We need to allow ourselves to be transformed. And as we individually transform, we will bring transformation to the worlds, the communities around us. So there's a lot of ways to kind of break this down and to make it applicable for the world around us. Again, back to that dwelling question, you have the choice between being effective or being in control. And you are given that choice in every community you are a part of. And if you think about it, if you grab a piece of paper and you start writing it down, thinking about all the different communities that you are a part of, I think you might surprise yourself. Because a community is just a collection of people that are working towards one common interest, right? A truly productive Christian community is one that is putting the needs of all above the needs of the individual, right? So think about all the communities that you are a part of. I know Pastor Steve mentioned family systems. That is a community. Your family, your immediate family is a community. Your extended family is a community. Your church family is a community, right? One that you are adopted into. But we are part of many different communities. If you're a runner, if you're a cyclist, if you like sports, if you're a quilter, you're part of different communities. If you like to get together and play bridge, rummy, pinochle, euchre, the greatest card game ever, you're part of a community, right? It's not just the big things like, political parties or national identities or, college football associations. I mean, we are part of so many different communities. And in each one, we have that option. We have that option to be effective, whereby we are not focusing on how the community is benefiting us, what we're getting out of the community, that if we're putting something in, is it going to equal what we're going to get out of it, right? We're not doing it for our own self-pleasure. Right? To be truly effective is to be selfless, is to live into that giving, to focus on the others in your community, to focus on your neighbor. Or we can, choose to be in control and only participate when we know we're going to get something out of it, or only participate in the activities that we enjoy. I'll give a really good example, a personal example. I'm not much of a birthday guy. I'll be honest. I've never been much for like the huge pizzazz and the celebration. So much so that I don't even share my birthday on Facebook. If you try to look it up, you won't know when my birthday is unless you look in my feed and you try to see when other people are giving me birthday wishes. But my wife loves birthdays. She loves to celebrate other people, right? Her helping be part of that, planning the events, going out to dinner to celebrate the other person, that's part of how she shows her love and support. So I have the choice. When it comes time for her birthday, do I do something big for her or our daughter or anybody else in my family because they do something big for me, or because it's something that I have to do because it's a birthday? Or do I do it because I want to be effective and productive in showing how much I care? Do I want to be focused on myself and what I'm getting out of it? Or do I want to focus on them, the other, my neighbor? We have that choice. Now, I'm not saying that being inner-directed and other-focused is easy. It's actually quite difficult, right? Because a lot of times it's going to push us outside of our comfort zones. It's going to bring us into places that we may not want to be. But those things, those differences, those barriers, we transcend them out of love for the purpose of the community and out of our love for the people in that community. And if I want to go on one quick sidebar and say, well, who is in my community? Well, if we're looking at it from the Christian perspective, everyone is in our community, right? Because Jesus Christ died for everyone, even the people we really don't get along with. They're part of our community too. So it's not hard. I mean, it's not going to be easy. It is hard. And with that comes a lot of fear. And with that comes a lot of challenge. Because it's hard to think outside of the hierarchy box, right? We're used to looking at things in steps, in that pyramid. Like the person on the top is the person on top. Then that person has these people. And then those people have people. And then eventually we get down to wherever we are in that system. We're trained to think like that. But that's where we go back to these first three quotes, because they literally flip everything around. And it's not that they're flipping it upside down. They're not saying, let's elevate the lowest of the low all the way up to the highest of the high. You know, we're not challenging the stations of the hierarchy in that way. We're looking at how each person treats the other people. Right? Because the differences are important. We need leaders. But a truly effective and productive leader is not one that manages downward. It's one that elevates people up. It's one that helps facilitate growth, helps facilitate learning. One that doesn't demean, but encourages. One that equips. That's a truly effective leader. Right? If we look at our church community has a leadership structure, right? Pastors generally are usually put up here, right? And then you have, other key leaders of the church, like council presidents, council members, and then leaders of chairs and committees and stuff like that, down to that lowly parishioner. But what we're challenged here is, and what we see in this system of our church community, is that the pastor is not some great, all-powerful, saintly, divine being. No, the pastor's human, just like everybody else. It's just their calling is a little bit different than other people's callings, right? The ministry they serve is a little different. I'm working very closely with all of those who are involved in Christian education. And I do not consider myself above them. Actually, some of whom I'm working with educated me when I was just a youth. Right? We are equal. I trust them just as much as they trust me. But that's what we're called to do. We're called to acknowledge and accept that there are going to be differences within the community, but those differences are what make the community strong. If we look at life together with Bonhoeffer, Bonhoeffer tells us that the perfect synthesis of a community is when the strengths of members overcome the weaknesses of others. And everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And when we realize that everybody in the community serves an essential function for the benefit of the community, then we are living into these three quotes that we see at the beginning of this chapter. So, ultimately, what does a truly productive community look like? A productive community is a community that shows us a kingdom in which the great are ministers to all, an army where the generals are chief servants, first among equals, and a beloved community of friends. A truly productive community that we want to live into, a community that can help us change the world around us, is a community where the differences are not ignored but are transcended through our love for the common purpose of that community and the love that we have for each other in that community. Again, it's not going to be easy, but this is that first step in making change a reality. To realize that it's not a solo effort, right? We can do great things on our own. That is very true. But we're not supposed to be alone. We weren't created to be alone. When Jesus sent out the disciples, Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. Didn't send them out on solo missions. They weren't lone wolfing it in the world. We are called to be in community, to have that communion together. And to be truly effective and productive, we do need to be inner-driven and outside focused or other focused or focused on our neighbor. So I want to encourage you to think about those communities that you are a part of, to dwell with it, and to ask yourself that question. These communities that I'm in, am I making the choice to be an effective member, or am I making the choice to try and be in control? Because if we're effective, if we are a team player, focused not on ourselves, but on others, on our neighbors, then that change will happen. I want to close with just a moment of thanks for joining me this evening. I look forward to getting into deeper discussions through this book. And I know I'm going to run a little long, but you do not have to stay in last, but I am going to play for you a song that just kind of talks about being focused on the other. So God bless you. God is with you. God loves you. So do I. Take care, and thank you.